Ladies, gentlemen, people of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, welcome to my Loki Season 2, Episode 2 recap, review, and breakdown. Once again, I'm happy to say I enjoyed this week's episode. I don't think it hit as hard as the premiere episode, but that's kind of to be expected. They want to kind of really capture you with that first episode, and, you know, that's not putting down this episode. It just felt a little bit more of a bridge episode to whatever the events are that will take place in Episode 3 next week. Having said that, a few things did happen this episode, some developments that I definitely want to talk about. So let's get right into the events of Loki Season 2, Episode 2. Let me know your own theories down in the comments below. We pick up with Loki and Mobius arriving in London, 1977, for the movie premiere of the Zaniac. Now, when looking into that a little bit further, it turns out Zaniac is a Marvel Comics character, actually a demonic entity who went on to possess people, one of them being X5's newfound name, Brad Wolfe. Now, clearly X5 hasn't been taken over by this entity from the Dark Dimension. It's just a cool little nod to it. The artwork is even there, reflective of the imagery from the comic books. They're here to find Sylvie. They want to know what's going on with Docs. So this is when he starts to run away and he gets pursued. This kind of reminded me of a Mission Impossible scene of just Tom Cruise going ham down an alleyway. I really did enjoy Loki flexing his magic. We don't really see that all too often. So this is when they take X5 back to the TVA, and they're pretty interested in his tempad, which appears to be rigged. So they take it to OB, and he's stressing out, as you kind of would, given what's going on with the loom and, you know, how he's going to handle all of these extra branches. And he informs them to read the manual because whatever they want to know about this rigged tempad device will be in there. So this is where we revisit what's going on somewhat with Renslayer, because we have Hunter asking about Renslayer's time pad. We learn that analysts are running traces manually since Miss Minutes is down, but with all of the extra branches, it's like finding a needle in the haystack. But there is one thing that Casey did learn after Renslayer erased all of the data from her time pad, and he tells Loki and Mobius that Miss Minutes is helping Renslayer. And this is when Loki says that when he was in the past last episode, he heard something, an old conversation between Renslayer and He Who Remains. It sounded like they were partners. So given last season we saw Renslayer leave through that time door, she said she was like searching for free will. We can't forget that her memory was wiped as well, and she was kind of struggling with all of this at the same time. She's probably gone to where we see Kang is in the trailers, of whom is Victor Timely, which is going to set up a very interesting storyline to how all of this connects together, especially with her seeking answers as to what her past is. The question is, what is going to go on from here on out? Once she learns a little bit more, is she going to help him like she clearly helped Kang in the past and where they were partners? I would love to know any theories you have down in the comments. And now this is when Loki and Mobius go to X5 and ask where Docs and Sylvie are and what these mods are on the tempad. This is where we see X5 taunt Loki quite a bit, saying that he just makes everything worse for Mobius, B-15, and his mother. So this very much so hits a nerve with Loki. We also have X5 turn it on to Mobius, trying to appeal to what everyone has learned in the TVA. Does he ever wonder about who he was on the timeline? And speaking of the episode title, Breaking Bad, and Loki actually managing to hold it in, this is when Mobius somewhat loses his cool and slaps X5 around the face. Loki and Mobius talk about this over some pie. Clearly, as much as Mobius is trying to make out that this doesn't bother him, he enjoys working in the TVA. He doesn't really want that rattling around his head in terms of if he left something behind. It's maybe easier if he left something bad behind, but what if something was left behind that was good, such as jet skiing off into the sunset? He doesn't want to know about that, but it still clearly lives rent-free in his head a little bit. So I think this is very clear and obvious foreshadowing that we will learn what Mobius left behind, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think we do get little hints of that in the trailer. The question will be whether he wants to accept and go back to what he left behind, or if he's kind of okay with the new life that he's leading. So up next is when we see X5 crack, because we have Loki bring in that device, which is basically meant to kind of torture him, but Loki's playing a bad cop and Mobius is kind of freaking out outside. But as we know, he was in on the situation. This again, episode is titled Breaking Bad. I guess Loki could have, but it still just shows the growth that this Loki has gone through and how all of this was an act. And, you know, he could have done some terrible, awful things to him, but he didn't. And so this is where we have X5 reveal that she has a new life and she's on a branch. Meanwhile, with OB, he goes back to the loom with his new device and he's getting ready to gear it up, but he gets a message saying access denied, invalid temporal aura. So Hunter and Casey go to OB and he's running around screaming that we're all gonna die. And so this is when OB reveals why he's freaking out, and that's because the containment doors are locked and only the person who designed it can open it with a live scan of his temporal aura. And that is none other than He Who Remains. And obviously he's dead, so, you know, as they acknowledge here, without Miss Minutes to help override the lock, they're kind of stuck. And Casey says in this moment, so, you know, either they've got to kind of get Miss Minutes back, or I guess finding a He Who Remains, which would be Victor Timely, of whom we're going to go and meet this season. So you can kind of guess that in a fairly straightforward theory that they're going to go to where Victor Timely is, somehow bring him back to the TVA, and then he will, I guess, have the matching temporal aura to raise the blast doors so we can get Obi to do what he needs to do to manage to handle all of the extra branches. But obviously things are never going to be that straightforward, especially when you consider the future that Loki got popped into. Things seem like pretty critical when he sees the future Sylvie as well. So there is some things that, okay, we can imagine that Victor Timely is going to be brought to the TVA, or maybe as they kind of tease, we need to convince a rogue artificial intelligence to come back. So maybe something to do with Miss Minutes as well. But something is going to go awry. Also, I know there's some theories out there about OB. Like, is OB as nice and as happy as he seems to be? I don't want to read too deep into it, but one thing is that he seems to be a character, and I mentioned this in last week's review, of whom still has his memory intact from a long time ago. Like, he is the person who's made all of the gadgets and inventions for the TVA. He remembers Mobius 400 years ago. Like, how far back does his memory go? Does it go back to when He Who Remains was ruling the TVA? Now, surely if that was the case, there would have been some like lines about that, but with how they seem to be portraying the character very comedically, I can imagine a line in the future gets said and he was like, oh yeah, I remember that. And then Mobius and Loki are like, well, why didn't you say something? Like, he remembers doing this for Kang or whatever. So let me know if you think Obi's memory is intact from the past. And what I mean by that is the past we saw Loki in, where there were statues in the TVA of Kang, He Who Remains, and everything like that. And if you also think that there's maybe something even bigger to OB that we're not thinking about, I don't know. It feels kind of a cliche, tropey thing to do, but I guess I wouldn't rule anything out right now. So after cracking X5, this is where Loki and Mobius and X5 go to the branch in where Sylvie is located at McDonald's doing a shift, and we have them reunite after, well, I was about to say after all this time, but technically it hasn't been that long in the grand scheme of things. And Loki begins to explain the problem about being pulled through time, also how he saw her in the future and what was she doing there, but obviously she doesn't know because A, that's the future, but B, she hates the TVA and she doesn't ever plan on going back there. But the thing is, it is kind of an inevitability, if you think about it, that she will go there, she will help out, unless she really does want every single last branch to go haywire, because that is, after all, what we saw happening in the future. And already with what happens at the end of this episode with certain branches being completely pruned, even though she doesn't believe it right now, she will indeed return to help out again. This is when Mobius and X5 come outside of McDonald's to Loki and Sylvie, because it turns out that X5 was hiding that this was kind of a setup, or he didn't really give away every detail and how he knew that Docs was setting prune charges on every single branch out there. So Sylvie enchants X5 and looks at what he knows, and she sees the location of where they're at. This is when she uses her magic to kind of give herself the Loki armor underneath the coat that she's wearing. So we're now seeing her wear the same kind of attire as what she was wearing in that elevator scene. This is when we see them go through the time door, and we see that Docs is about to bomb every single branch. Basically, kind of what we all saw happening at the end of last episode. At this point, though, back at the TVA, B-15 is already observing that some branches are being pruned, and this is when they go in to try and prevent that from happening. So we see Loki try and distract them, we see Sylvie kind of go a bit ham, but unfortunately, as we can tell, back at the TVA, even though they kind of managed to stop just a handful of branches from being pruned, most of them were lost. And you can see like the main sacred timeline in the middle with only a few branches remaining, and essentially, you know, loads and, you know, unthinkable numbers of people have now been wiped from existence. But there's kind of a silver lining. Remember earlier in how they said they were, you know, trying to locate Renslayer's location, and the analysts were having to go through all of these branches, and given that they don't have missed minutes, it's taken them a long time. Well, with a lot of branches now gone, it's a lot easier to find Renslayer, and they get a hit on her tempad. So this is what I meant by this episode being kind of more of a bridge, and it feels like it facilitated maybe even more bigger things going down next episode, with us seeing what's been going on with Renslayer, maybe her finding Victor Timely, Loki and Mobius going there and really just getting into the next big thing. In this moment as well, we have Sylvie walking away. She mocks the TVA, saying that the TVA is the problem, it's broken, it's rotten, and I was just thinking, well, yeah, but you kind of brought the threat of Kang back, so there is that. Now, speaking of Sylvie, at the very end of the episode, we see her chilling outside of McDonald's, talking about coming back to work, even though she's probably not gonna go back to work because we know she's going to help out again. She is holding the device that He Who Remains was wearing on his hand or his wrist in season 1. Now, this is like a mix of a tempad and a twister, if I remember. So not only being able to open time doors, the way she kind of sent Loki back at the end of season 1, but also being able to teleport. So this will probably come in handy with what she needs to do to help out in where we saw her in the elevator in the future. And maybe it has even more of a significance, I'm not sure, but they were definitely focusing on that device in the last few seconds of this episode. So if you have any theories of how that could come in extra handy, let me know down in the comments below. But that is more or less the episode. Again, I'm really enjoying it. It didn't feel as though much happened this week, but as I said at the very beginning of this video, that's kind of understandable. Sometimes episodes do provide a bit of a bridge to ramp up the storyline to get even beefier in the episode after that. So I think things are cooking along nicely. I'm really enjoying the main plot. There's just something about the Loki show which I have enjoyed so much more than other Marvel Disney Plus shows. I can't wait to get more into the Victor Timely stuff, whatever's going on with Renslayer there, getting head over heels into that, as while also simultaneously the Kang threat is rising. We're getting more lines to that, don't forget. For example, Loki saying to Sylvie, it's like, what about when one of his variants show up? She's just like, oh, I'll kill them. We're getting references to it, but we haven't actually had any proper teasers of the repercussions of what Sylvie did at the end of last season, so you have to think that's going to start coming in sooner or later. But let me know your thoughts on Loki Season 2, Episode 2 down in the comment section, guys. If you enjoyed this video, would really appreciate a like on it, but that's everything from me today. Check out yesterday's video just in case you missed it. It's a Marvel news update with some very interesting stuff going down there. But until next time, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you people of the MCU in the next video. Goodbye.